Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the OPC's book night tonight. I'm the executive director of the OPC, Patricia Kranz. We're delighted to showcase a book by former OPC president and OPC stalwart Bill Holstein called A Grand Strategy, Countering China, Taming Technology, and Restoring the Media. And discussing his book with him is OPC Governor John Avlon, who is a senior political analyst at CNN and an anchor on and commentator on CNN's New Day. So now I'll turn it over to John. Thank you both.
Thank you, Patricia. And Bill, congratulations on the new book.
Thank you very much. Please show that again as many times as you wish. Right.
I'll just keep it up here instead of my face. But it's a great read, not surprisingly, and you weave basically personal history, memoir, with some really profound insights about what you've learned over the course of your career and applying them forward with strategic suggestions in I think it's fair to say three main areas: China, media, and technology. I want to just tell folks we're going to talk for around an hour, but you guys are going to come in for conversation, around halfway mark. So we want, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And this is really a conversation among colleagues about the lessons learned as they apply forward by a dear, valued OPC member and former chair, Bill. So, Bill, as I said, the book is really strategic insights and advice framed within a memoir. And you came into the business in kind of the golden age of journalism, at least as it applies to foreign, spending and being able to travel on organizations' dimes. And you found yourself in the middle of one of probably the great story of our time at its earliest stages, when you were brought in to cover Beijing, when it was a very different country than it is today. Tell us how that happened and what you saw then, just for folks to understand.
Well, I was a 27-year-old on the UPI foreign desk in New York, and I was trying to get a transfer anywhere in the world. So I would have gone anywhere. So Jimmy Carter and Deng Xiaoping normalized relations, so UPI realized they needed to reinforce the region. So they sent in the senior people into Peking, it was called at the time, not Beijing, it was Peking. And so I was sent to Hong Kong as a junior kind of person to support general operations. But one piece of my job was to cover Southern China. And so I went in to cover the Canton Trade Fair. At that time, Guangzhou was called Canton. So here I was, 27 years of age, I knew nothing about China, so to speak, any Chinese. But the big question in everybody's minds around the world was, can the Chinese modernize economically? Can they break free from the Cultural Revolution, which had devastated them for years, right? As many as 10 million people may have died in ideological struggle. So they were now, Deng Xiaoping was now proclaiming to get rich is glorious. We're all going to turn the corner and engage in economic modernization. So my senior colleagues in Beijing couldn't see any of it. It was all concentrated in Southern China, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, the special economic zone. So I would go into Guangzhou and Canton and walk around the streets and say, it looks to me like these people are interested in the things I'm wearing. I had a watch, a camera, I had a beard at the time, like I do now. So crowds would gather to look at me and look at my clothes and my cameras and pens and notebooks and things I had, shoes. They wanted those things, right? They didn't want class struggle. So I wrote that the average man in the street of Canton is more interested in acquiring the material things that the West owns than in class struggle. And for that deep insight, I won an Overseas Press Club Award for best economic reporting from abroad. And so this is what launched me. This is why I've been so dedicated to the OPC for so many years.
Well, and I think to mutual benefit. You mentioned the Cultural Revolution, which you were in the wake of, and it's so fascinating because it was such enormous dislocation and, as you say, mass death in the name of ideology. sketch out for folks what it was like to be there in the wake of that, and then how the Chinese assimilated the memory of that into a new material aims, which they have continued to this day.
Well, Deng Xiaoping was remarkably transformative as a leader. One of the stories that I recall that I never wrote about for UPI was they wanted to build a port in Zhuhai in Guangzhou province. And so there was a mountain in the way. The southern coast of China is very rough, very rugged. So I went there to see, oh, you're going to build a port here and there's a mountain in the way, right? Sure. Well, they had guys up in the top of the mountain with pickaxes and shovels, and then a pattern of people going down the hill in a circuitous path with wheelbarrows. They were going to take down this mountain, let's say it was 2,000 feet high, with pickaxes and shovels. They had the manpower and the labor to do that. And they had a sense that we, the Chinese people, have time. You know, Mao said the Chinese people can wait 10,000 years. It wasn't going to take 10,000 years to take down this mountain, but the Chinese realized that when they focus their enormous human resources on an objective, on a common objective, they can achieve things that the outside world can never expect or understand. And that, in fact, is what they've done over the intervening 40 years. They have focused their human resources on creating a modern, technologically very sophisticated state that is engaged in a worldwide campaign to establish themselves as the center of a new Chinese empire. And so I saw the very early stages of that. And then different stages of my career. I was Beijing bureau chief in 81, 82. Then I write about, in the book, I write about the middle years going back as far as late as 2008, dozens of trips. So over the arc of 40 years, you can see how the basic patterns that you could just begin to see played out. And so, of course, we all were terribly confused, but we didn't know what we, the West, were doing in opening China up. We really didn't know. We assumed that they would want to be like us, right? Doesn't everybody want to be like us? Don't they want to have the things that we have? Don't they want, and all the early evidence was, yes, they want economic modernization. They want political liberalization. They want to break away from the tyranny of the Cultural Revolution. All the early indications, I'd say for decades, were that this was a great success story, not only for China, but for the world.
Well, and that, one of the most profound paragraphs in the book is where you really cop to the fact that, you were a big believer, as it was bipartisan, in engaging with China because it would lead to liberalization. That's what history had taught us, or so we believe. And the skeptics at the time seemed kind of like cranks. Now, you describe yourself as a curmudgeon, but you acknowledge that essentially you were wrong and they were right. Where was the blind spot? Well,
great question. For decades, 4 decades, throughout Deng Xiaoping, Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin, I'd say for 3 decades, we saw a pattern where the Chinese began developing internet access. That was a big thing. We all thought the internet access was going to open China up to all sorts of different influences. We thought the middle class would demand political rights. It just seems logical to us that economic modernization meant wealth, meant we stand up for our rights. They allowed lawyers to develop, to defend dissidents. They allowed labor unions to have strikes. They allowed foreign NGOs to go in to work with women, work on environmental causes. And so it was called the peaceful evolution theory, that over time, we didn't know quite how China would evolve. No one knew, but they would peacefully solve the problem of how do they make a transition from complete communist control, complete totalitarian control, to a model, their own model, right? We thought that these values that we were representing were international values. And so that we saw it in Japan, in Taiwan, in South Korea. We saw other places where I traveled. We saw that there seemed to be a connection between modernization, political liberalization, a softening of authoritarian rule. We all thought that We all believed in that. And it's only been Xi Jinping in the last 6 or 7 years, starting really in he took power in 2012, 2013. The nature of his power really became evident in 2015, I'll say. We did an OPC China-Hands reunion that resulted in one of the earliest insights into how they were moving backwards. They were no longer moving in the direction we all expected. So Xi Jinping surprised the world. He was a communist, an authoritarian communist of a sort we had never seen.
I want to pause you there because would you really call Xi a communist?
Absolutely. I mean, you could argue that he's a Leninist or a Stalinist, but he believes that all power flows through him personally. He has installed Xi Jinping thought. If you disagree with me, I'm going to put you in the gulag, right? And so he has established the Communist Party. He has reinserted the Communist Party into control of every private sector company. The private sector was blossoming. Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, all these companies were blossoming. And in just the last few months, we can see that Jack Ma has been punished at Alibaba, and that most recently Didi has been punished for having an IPO. He is reimposing absolute communist control over the so-called private sector in China.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing on earth I am is a communist apologist, but I do think, I guess, he's a dictator and authoritarian.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think there's any ideology other than power that I can see. But I want to get to a lot of the things you just touched on. One, the recent turns, the way that technology unwittingly did not lead to liberalization, and the internet in particular, U.S. trade policy. But because you touched on it explicitly, why do you think everyone in the U.S. or most observers underestimated Xi and thought that he would be sort of someone who continued to support liberalization and closer ties with America and the international community?
Well, that's a mouthful. So the technology, they started building the Great Firewall. In fact, our companies helped build it. Cisco Systems helped build this Great Firewall that the Chinese government insisted on. So at first, it didn't seem like it would be completely like the Great Wall of China. We didn't think it would be as impervious as it has developed. But basically, they've developed a form of censorship that they can control all the information that goes in to China. Very few Western news organizations are able to disseminate their information there, and the ones that do are very careful to toe the line, to only communicate financial information or certain information that doesn't violate the Chinese Communist Party's edicts. So the party has astutely turned the internet into a tool of control, into a tool to looking into people's lives. Okay, you can say big tech here has done much the same, and okay, they have, but it's not our government that knows when we're waking, when we're breathing, when we're walking, when we're not walking. It knows our retinal scans. They have turned the internet into a massive tool of the WeChat function, for example, means that they know everything that you buy in China. They know everything you post on social media, and you get points. You get a social media rating, like we have credit ratings here, right? There you get a rating on your citizenship. Are you a true believer or not? So they've turned the internet into a tool that we just never imagined that it could be turned into that. Xi Jinping emerged from a power struggle within the Communist Party, and we were not sufficiently sophisticated to understand who he really was. I remember Hank Paulson, former Goldman Sachs, former Treasury Secretary, the minute he took power, Hank Paulson ran around saying, oh, he's a liberalizer. He's going to open up the financial markets. Oh, he's been to Iowa. He spent a semester or however long it was in Iowa. So we got it profoundly wrong. I mean, our China watching establishment got it profoundly wrong. We had no idea who this man was. He suffered during the Cultural Revolution, he went down to the countryside. His father suffered, but it turns out he was a true believer. He was a true believer, not so much in Mao, but as my erudite friends point out, he was a true believer in Lenin and Stalin. Those are his true models. He believes in the great man, the theory of governance. And so he would share the Chinese criticism of Gorbachev and the other Soviet leaders for not being men enough to stand up and beat down the opponents. So it's been very surprising. He surprised everyone.
Well, you know, I think it's just one, notch one more mistake to the establishment opinion when it comes to great changes in geopolitics.
Right.
You discussed, their technology and the U.S. role in building the Chinese system, and I think that segues pretty well to the complicity, as you frame it, self-interested, of U.S. technology in building this surveillance state. And what do you think can and should be done from a matter of industrial policy to try to counteract it?
Wow, you just asked the $64 million or $64 billion question. Yes, see, there was a period where we believed the Chinese were moving in broad directions that were in conformity with international ideals. And so it was okay for American companies to go in and sell technology. We thought it was a positive. We thought it was a win. So Microsoft helped China develop their whole artificial intelligence industry. Cisco, as I mentioned, helped build the Great Wall. Intel sells more semiconductors in China than it sells in the United States. Qualcomm's semiconductors, they design semiconductors made by Taiwan Semiconductor in Taiwan. They're showing up in the hands of the Chinese military. NVIDIA in California sells graphics chips that end up in the hands of the companies doing the surveillance of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. On and on it goes. Thermo Fisher sells DNA testing equipment that the authorities use to build up DNA databases of suspected miscreants, including people of ethnicity that they don't trust. So suddenly we realize that the Chinese are not moving in anything resembling conformity with American interest or American values. So American companies, American CEOs, and I've interviewed thousands or hundreds, certainly hundreds of American CEOs over the years, who believe that they have the right, in fact, that it's their mission to sell technology anywhere in the world that they can make money.
Yeah.
And that their mission is to enhance shareholder earnings every quarter, that they are no responsibility for national security. That's the government's problem. So there's a moment of great reckoning coming in. We see it in China right now. Xi Jinping is cracking down on their technology companies, demanding that their data become pure, that they don't have any foreign entanglements, that software become indigenized, that it's no longer foreign technology. We face one of the most sensitive and difficult debates that we face is, can the American government work with American business in mitigating the rise of a technological powerhouse that represents a clear challenge to our interests? This is hot. This is really a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's as big as it gets, and it does segue to one of the other themes of your book, which is that a lot of the short-term or quarterly earnings thinking of American businesses has been insufficient to the grand strategy needs of our time. I want to narrow it a little bit to the, because this is the OPC, to that kind of zero-sum thinking as it applies to the media industry. And you tee off appropriately on Alden Capital and some of the others, but really because your career has witnessed the winnowing of journalism. Folks who haven't had the privilege of reading your book yet, I wonder if you would just summarize your sense of how the journalistic establishment got hollowed out, and then we can discuss some of the ways you think it can be rebuilt.
Wow, another billion-dollar question. Well, so every organization I worked for in my career either went bankrupt or was sold for pennies on the dollar. UPI was sold out. Then I went to Business Week for 11 years, and that was sold to Bloomberg for pennies on the dollar. I went to U.S. News and World Report. It went dark. I went to Business 2.0. It sold to Time Inc. and went dark.
It's an amazing story, by the way, about the sale.
Yeah.
I want to tell people because it's actually a real testament to the idiocy of some of these.
Well, we were at Business 2.0. This is during the time of the first internet bubble, and so we had a mission to go up against the Forbes, Fortune, and Business Week, and we had really a very dynamic mix of very talented people. And so Time Inc. bought us for $100 million and fired everybody and merged the magazine with something called eCompany Now. And then they had to invest another $100 million in trying to rescue their sorry asses. And so it didn't work. They ended up closing the whole thing. So they lost $200 million on what a stupid decision. So yeah, I mean, my whole career was characterized by this. And every time I mention these things, people say to me, Bill, please don't come to work here. Please, whatever you do, don't come to work here. So over the years, you see how the ownership structure was hollowed out. The Gannett's and the Chicago Tribunes and those guys were able to take over so many of the newspapers, so many media outlets, and start squeezing them. At the same time, we have the vulture capitalists sweep in and start snapping up media assets. And so there was nobody to stop it, nobody to resist it. And so I argue in the book that journalists, we need to step outside the newsroom, and rather than going home at the end of the day, or in the old days, going to the bar, that we need to be engaged in conversations about who owns our media, who owns us, and are we stable or not enough to do our job, which is the job of being the voice, the conscience of America? Can we do that job, or do we get sidelined into sowing hate and division? And of course, the rise of the social media giants is another major piece of this, that they absorb so much content from us, and yet, there would be an antitrust violation for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, ABC, CNN, et cetera, to say, we're going to sit down and create a council to negotiate with Google over what they pay us for our content. That's the antitrust. Can you believe that? I mean, yeah. Google and Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, all of them have created these incredible platforms that have the power to dictate what we believe. They're shaping what Americans believe, and they are cannibalizing the advertising base that once sustained the American media. So we have an urgent mission to think outside of just getting the story and just doing our jobs, just beating the opposition, to think about how can we create conversations in which we can say, how do we recreate an American media that is not dominated by the social algorithms that create division, that intentionally, consciously create division? How can we rescue ourselves from the clutches of the vulture capitalists? How can we rebuild any measure of a media that does what I was trained, I believe you were trained to do, which was try to be at the center of the national debate and try to be arbiters, gatekeepers, try to do the right thing for the democracy. Well, I know that sounds like incredibly naive, incredibly simple, but that's what we're supposed to do. And so if we cannot figure out a way to create an environment of opinion, then nobody else can.
So let me pause you there. I mean, I agree with you that we need to have more of a sense of commitment to the common good. And but one of the, I think, profound points you make in the book is that it's sort of stunning that the utter PR failure of journalists in making the case for our own essential civic role and communicating that to the public in a way that they can understand, while distrust in the media is sown by politicians with phrases like enemy of the people and the combination
kill the media, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't want to over-index the people who shout that, but yeah. But it's evidence of declining trust in institutions, particularly the media. So, given that it's a PR fail by people whose job it is to tell people what's happening, and that as journalists we believe that there is such a thing as facts, even if objective truth, maybe in a philosophical realm. We're not swimming in a sea of relativism. So, what is your suggestion on how we can play offense in the PR battle? And then we can get to a structural solution. You mentioned the Salt Lake Tribune, but let's start with just what we should do to play offense to win this PR battle that we've lost today.
Well, I mean, even going out to talk to high school classes, going out to talk to college classes, to engage. You see some signs that the New York Times is beginning to do this. There, page 2, they talk about how do we gather the news? Who are the people involved in gathering it? What are their values? Where do they go? How much money do they spend? I mean, most average Americans have no idea what we as journalists do, that we go all over the world. We put our butts on the line in many cases. We create these complex institutions where we have layers of editing, layers of, in your world of video, we have bookers, producers, analysts. So there's a process involved and a thought process about how we create news. News is not just an 18-year-old farting in public, in effect, excuse my French, but you just don't bloviate and by yourself in public and call that news. You have as institutions, we have processes, we put out corrections, we cross-check each other, we have values. And so Mark Zuckerberg said the other day that well, we don't really want private sector companies dictating what truth is in our society, do we? Well, that's what every media organization in the private sector does. We absorb information from all over the world and different beats, different technologies, human rights and civil rights, and we try to create a fabric. We try to create a meaningful middle ground where we could present this to the American people. And so we need to explain that. And so for some reason, we assumed that the American people understood that. We assumed that the American people understood that we do this not to get rich. We're certainly not getting rich at this. We're doing it out of a sense of responsibility. And so that's the message I think we need to communicate more broadly and more passionately through every channel we have.
You mentioned the Mark Zuckerberg anecdote, and I thought it was actually a profound sort of rejoinder. Just briefly, because it's in the news again. What's your feeling about Section 230?
Well, this is incredibly important. And for those of the uninitiated, it basically says to all the social media platforms, you cannot be sued for anything that goes on your platform. So, so what that means is that the social media platforms have the right to put the most outrageous, inflammatory, extremist stuff on their platforms without vetting it, without checking it. In fact, exacerbating it. In fact, inflaming it with the algorithms that direct it to the most marginalized and sympathetic audiences. So I don't think you can completely get rid of Section 230, but I do think it needs to be amended to imply, to suggest that there are some sort of limits on the garbage, frankly, the garbage that the social media platforms are throwing out. There needs to be guardrails of some sort on social media platforms. There need to be certain areas where the monitors, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg talks about how he's hired 30,000 monitors, but all the reporting suggests that they can't really monitor, that they're not really allowed to do their jobs. They're just there for PR, right? For Zuckerberg's PR purposes. So there need to be at least some sectors that are moderated. Maybe some of the traffic in the most sensitive sectors can be delayed 3 or 4 minutes. Imagine delaying it 3 or 4 minutes to allow monitoring systems to take effect. Would that end the world? Would that be the end of the world? No. So there needs to be discipline imposed on these social media platforms. And Section 230 is one tool that I think could be amended, not gotten rid of, but amended in a responsible way that would move the social media giants in a direction of taking responsibility for the content that they disseminate.
That's mend it, not end it. I like that. All right, we're at the halfway mark. So what I want to do is start taking folks' questions, but I want to begin with Clyde Prestowitz, who I believe is going to get beamed in, and then I will go through the chat and pick up some of your other questions. Clyde, you're muted, Clyde.
We go. Okay,
Sure.
hear me now?
Yep.
Bill, let me congratulate you on a great book.
Thank you.
So my question is
If
regarding,
you're not on camera, can you allow your video to be on? We'll see your shining face, but otherwise you can be anonymous if you wish.
well, I think I'm on video, aren't I there?
Nope.
Well, I don't know.
Your name is though.
Maybe that would do it. How about that?
There you go.
Ah!
Hey.
What a handsome guy, huh? Anyhow, here's the question. You talked about U.S. companies having helped the communist regime build what they've got, which is certainly true. I want to maybe take it a step further. If I look at a company like Apple, and we call it an American company, and legally it's, I guess, probably a Delaware company, but legally it is an American company. But I would argue, I wonder if you agree with me, that actually Tim Cook is more afraid of Beijing than he is of Washington. In Washington, he's powerful. He's got armies of lawyers and lobbyists. In Beijing, he kowtows just like everybody else. And I use Tim Cook, but the same is true for many, many other of the major US CEOs. I wonder if there's a way for the US to offset this tilt, this kind of inevitable tilt to China, because the Chinese government has more handle on our CEOs than our own government does.
Thank you, Clyde. Clyde and I had an article that appeared in the National Review this morning, so Chad will put that in the chat space, I think, at some point. Well, in many ways, Apple is a Chinese company. Their entire production chain for iPhones and two other products, iMac and another product, are managed by a Taiwanese company, Honhai or Foxconn, in China. Their entire supply chain is located in China. The entire manufacturing platform is there. The Chinese built the infrastructure, the roads, the plants, and so the Chinese, in effect, control what Apple does. Apple has been forced to turn over their data centers in China to Chinese government. So Apple does not manage their own data centers there. Apple has been forced to take down apps from their app store in Hong Kong that were benefiting the demonstrators in Hong Kong. They were able to find out where the police were using these apps. Apple has not been able to take even the first step to diversify their production platforms outside of China. The big, much ballyhooed plant in Wisconsin just simply never happened. That was an early stage announcement that Donald Trump and Paul Ryan made with Foxconn. So Apple is trapped in many ways in China. Their iPhones were used to, it is alleged in print, were used to spy on Uyghurs who owned iPhones. So Apple is deeply enmeshed in the Chinese government and in the Chinese police state, in the Chinese avenues of influence. So if I were in the US government, I would be saying, let's have a conversation, Tim, about how we can ease you back from being, even though you're headquartered in California, you're an American, it's an American company, in a de facto sense, you have gone over to being a Chinese company. How can we help you? How can we help you move away from that? Can we help you develop manufacturing in the United States? Can we, so I would start by saying, how can we help you? And if he resists over a period of time, then I would start throwing fines and start throwing the big stick, as you and I wrote. The big stick, the federal government has the big stick. It can say, the companies, you're violating American national security, and we demand that you start cooperating with us to ease this pattern. So it's a big question. Apple is probably the company that is the single most intertwined in China, I would say. Thanks, Clyde.
Recommend everybody Bill and Clyde's article. All right, got a bunch of questions for y'all. You can put them in the chat or the Q&A function. But Aldous Frank asks, which bylines do you look for these days for reporting about China? Good journalist question.
Well, I look for the bylines of winners of the OPC Foundation scholarships. So I'm delighted to see that Wei Ling for the New York Times has become central to the coverage of China. And then Eva Doe, another one of our winners for the is now the Washington Post bureau chief. Dake Kong is now one of our winners, now in the AP bureau, and doing crackerjack stuff. It was a Pulitzer finalist. Imagine that at age 28, 29, it was a finalist for the Pulitzers. Yi Ling Lu I've just seen her today writing out of China. So we've created a group of people who are deeply involved there. I like others for the New York Times. We had a panel discussion recently, and so there's some deep knowledge in the New York Times, even though they're covering it now from Taiwan and Australia. Their people got kicked out, right? But they're able to get in there. Chris Buckley I think, one of the brightest and most courageous journalists. He's now writing out of Australia. So so I read everything that comes out of China. The news wires are coming out now. There's a Sinocism. Bill Bishop does that. My friend Tiff Roberts, who was in Business Week in Beijing for 23 years, now does his own newsletter. So there's a flow of high quality information still coming out of China, even though the Chinese kicked out 15 or 17 Western correspondents and are applying major pressure against Western correspondents in terms of following them whenever they leave Beijing, intercepting their communications and constantly harassing them through the visas. And so the American journalists on the ground there are doing heroic jobs of trying to stand tall and deliver.
Those are all great bylines, and Sinocism and Chris Buckley in particular, I concur with, but you're the expert. One question we have is, when did it become obvious to you that China was not interested in becoming like us? Was it specific or gradual? And I'll add an addendum to that. What do you think the downfall of TPP was in terms of weakening an alliance against China with regard to trade?
Let me take the last thing first. That was a disastrous decision. We had the perfect tool there to link 12 nations, Japan, Australia, Southeast Asia, in a trade association that would have forced China to play by the rules that group established. To walk away from that was an absolute disaster. So to answer the first part of the question, the way things happen in China is all very gradually. This is one of the things that correspondents who have arrived in China from the Middle East or Africa, they're used to covering wars and insurrections, and bang, bang, things really happen. Boom, 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 things happen. Things in China happen very gradually, very incrementally. So it was only when Xi Jinping took over, he launched his anti-corruption campaign, which was really a power grab. It had little to do with corruption. It was really about solidifying his power base. So it was really the first time, in my mind, the alarm bells started going off was when we had the OPC China Hands reunion in 2014, I believe it was. We had Evan Osnos there, Seymour Topping, a lot of top people there. And so we organized a day to talk about what's really happening in terms of their embrace of political liberalization. Well, they're moving the other direction, Evan Osnos told us. What's really happening in their economic modernization and their embrace of private sector. Well, they're moving backwards. So that was the first piece of it. So the second piece for me was writing the book, the New Art of War, which came out 2 or 3 years ago, where I began looking into the slowly incremental nature of how the Chinese were the New Art of War is an important concept. We as Americans have never seen anything like this. The Soviet Union was a clear adversary. We had very little economic engagement with them. We were able to globalize, internationalize, and innovate technologically, and ultimately, we were able to force them to go belly up, to go bankrupt. We surrounded them. The Japanese were a much smaller nation. They never really were able to mount the intense offensive that it appeared at one point they were in the late 1980s. But the Chinese have developed this compete and cooperate model where at the same time we have effectively merged our economies. I mean, they're now the world's second largest economy. Walmart, Home Depot, and wherever you go into an American store, you're buying things made in America. We have linked ourselves so firmly, and that at the same time, then there's this confrontational dimension to it of technology, of influence. So we've never encountered a power like this, particularly in view of the fact that they have 1.4 billion people, roughly a 4-to-1 population advantage over us. So we have never encountered this before in American history. Never before have we. So we are at an intellectual kind of crossroads. Can we put our brains together and can we figure out the nature? Can we figure out the nature of this relationship? Can we figure out what's happening? And can we organize ourselves to respond? It is a first-class intellectual challenge that we all face. Can we cooperate as Americans across public sector lines, private sector lines? Can we cooperate? Can we pool our expertise, or can't we? Because the Chinese have declared a military civil fusion. They are a monolith. They're now 1.4 billion people following Xi Jinping thought. We need to, without abandoning our values, without abandoning the things we care about, we need to figure out how to become more cohesive, engaging in this very subtle and very sophisticated kinds of conflict.
So you're teasing basically the final chapter of the book, and you talk about the importance of galvanizing public opinion against this challenge. But there's some more specific policy prescriptions you have as well. So I wonder if you might delineate some of those.
Well, we need to get our technology policy right. We need, there's a $250 billion piece of legislation moving through Congress now, broad bipartisan support to support us in terms of our cutting edge technologies. That's all very good. I embrace it. But one of the challenges we face is that the Chinese are deeply ensconced in our technology infrastructure, not only the 360,000 Chinese students in the innermost sanctums of our laboratories, and they're not all spies. I don't want to create that boogeyman, but the Chinese also have penetrated using cyber security, cyber penetrations, as well as other forms of human penetration. So we can spend $250 billion on trying to develop these new technologies, but in effect, we have become a farm system, a AAA baseball team, where they can cherry pick the ideas that they like and take them back to China. They have shadow laboratories back there, and the government throws billions of dollars at them, and they can develop the ideas faster than we can because of impediments in how our venture capital system works in terms of how the interface between our private sector and public sector. So we have to tighten up our targets. We have to recognize that we've been deeply penetrated. I know this sounds wild like a Mad Hatter, but the evidence is overwhelming that the Chinese have penetrated our systems and are not getting caught. The Russians, we're catching the Russians because they use brute force. They're less sophisticated. So we need to harden our targets. We need to get smart about our technology development. We need to involve our allies in developing 5G and we need to compete against Huawei. We need to recognize that it's a olive world, all of our allies together, we need to tap all these talents to resist Chinese penetration of our systems, to create competitive products. And so we need to recognize the nature of the challenge, and then the allies, the relations with allies is so important. But it's already reached the point, I would argue, that we by ourselves cannot withstand the juggernaut that the Chinese have created. We need to work with our Japanese and Korean, Indian, European allies to create the technological base, the technological tools, the foreign policy tools to standards, to create the standards that will dominate the future. By ourselves, we simply cannot do it. It's already reached that point, in my view.
Which I think probably is what spurred the TPP question. We have a question from Tricia. How much did China's economic success hoodwink American business community and establishment? As a foreign correspondent in Russia, I thought America excused China's anti-democratic and human rights abuses because of economic success and opportunity. I think that I imagine that would be a resounding yes, but why don't you?
I'm not quite sure I get the question. Can you say it? Can you summarize it for me?
How much did China's economic opportunity hoodwink American businesses to overlook their human rights abuses?
Well, the obvious response is that there are billions of dollars being made in China, billions of dollars that are flowing directly to the bottom line, directly to share price, directly to the compensation packages of CEOs. So Tim Cook is a fabulously wealthy man, as is Jeff Bezos. The CEOs of these companies have made billions of dollars. Their shareholders have gained, their employees have gained, but they have personally become like the robber barons of the 1910s, 19-teens, as spectacularly wealthy men, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers. So and Wall Street drank the Kool-Aid long ago and has invested tens of billions of dollars in China. And so the Wall Street, we would expect Wall Street titans to complain vigorously if the Americans were to get serious about competing against China, because that might affect their enormous investments there. Their IPOs, for example, how many billions of dollars has Wall Street made bringing Chinese companies to have their IPOs on the New York Stock Exchange and on NASDAQ? So the profit motive has absolutely played an amazing role. Let me just one story. Since Xi Jinping, in fact, is in many ways is a Leninist, it was Lenin who said, "The capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will use to hang them." So that is the Leninist piece of this.
That's almost precisely, I suppose, what's occurred. That actually raises another question. It segues to the contemporary a bit, but to what extent is all this economic self-interest, the justifications of making money in China that's excused the human rights abuses being undercut by Xi's attack on free businesses? Whether
Right.
Jack Ma, we saw an incident with a rider app just the other day. One would think that this is potentially creating a counterforce that could undercut some of those assumptions.
There's something very big happening here, very, very deep is happening, that Xi Jinping is so determined to develop complete cybersecurity that a company like Didi had the audacity to go public on June 30th, a couple of days before the Communist Party's anniversary, after the party told them not to do that they have to be disciplined. And one piece of it is that they're saying that, well, if they went public in New York, that they have to disclose certain information to the Americans, and that will be used by CIA, NSA to spy on China. But the real piece of it is discipline. The Communist Party wants to discipline them. So the Chinese entrepreneurs who created these major successful companies are being reined in. They're being told, we want access to your data. We want to control your data. They're inserting Communist Party committees into these companies, which means if you have a Communist Party committee in your company, guess who tells you what to do? The Communist Party committee tells you, Mr. CEO, would you please go in this direction? So Xi Jinping is, this is so enormous, it's hard to be precise, but it would appear that he is starting a process of decoupling in some respects. that he is beginning a process of saying, blowing away the old arguments about globalization, that our companies can operate there and their companies can operate here, and that we can all be part of a big global happy family. It appears he's beginning to blow that apart, that he's beginning to say, I don't believe in that anymore. What I believe in is controlled by the Communist Party. And if you don't believe in that, then I have a gulag for you.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether the market and larger economic forces punish that power grab. It's perhaps too soon to say. Sean Connor asks, hey, Bill, can you talk a bit about the biggest technological threat on the horizon with China? Data, space, hypersonic, guided missiles, aircraft carriers. I believe it's hand down the rate towards artificial general intelligence, but I want to hear your thoughts. So, you know, that's a grab bag, but what do you think is the biggest emerging technology
Well, Sean is an AI guy, and I would agree that AI is one of the transformational technologies. Eric Schmidt came out with a big 400-page report on this just in the last few days. The Chinese are within 10 years could be ahead of us, the report concludes, if current trend lines hold in AI as it's developing. And the reason is that they have such enormous data sets. AI learns from being exposed to large sets of data. And there are no privacy constraints in China. So you can have 100 million health records and put an AI program to work in there to learn how to diagnose certain things, or in many different sectors. So AI, of course, has military implications, and it has cyber espionage implications. If you can develop AI tools to guide your missiles, if you can develop AI tools to hack into other people's computers and they can't see it coming, there are just enormous implications in the AI realm. Quantum computing is another one. The Chinese are pouring billions of dollars into that. It's a very strange concept, this concept that you can have these quarks, these entities that can be hold a 1 value and at the same time they hold a 0 value. I'm not at all sure it's ever going to work, but if it does work, every algorithm we have and every computer we have will be obsolete. The space thing is what's been astonishing me in recent weeks. The Chinese have put a vessel on Mars. They and sent home video. We may be one slight step ahead of that because our video was from a helicopter-like device, but the Chinese are demonstrating that they are at par or near par with us in terms of Mars, in terms of landing on the dark side of the moon, in terms of International Space Station, in terms of a spacewalk. This is just incredible that this has come out of nowhere, that they are capable of doing these things. I suspect that is all based or largely based on technology that they have acquired, probably not without paying for it.
Yeah.
And they see space as we also say in Star Trek, the final frontier. They see space as a place where they want to have dominance. So we still probably have dominance in the satellite realm, thanks to some of our guys like Elon Musk, who's launching a lot of satellites. But the Chinese are clearly not vying for technological equivalency. They're vying for technological supremacy, and they're in the process of doing that. They are in the act of trying to do that. So that's what's so astonishing about it.
That segues to another question we got, which is, how do you see that any way that U.S. businesses and government can stop the theft of intellectual property by China?
Well, we have to harden our intellectual targets and our IT systems. We need to do something about this. This is one of the most sensitive things. We could go on for an hour about this. Is we have 4 million Chinese Americans, 360,000 Chinese in our universities. I'd say that 90% of them want nothing to do with the Communist Party, but a certain number of them have family in China, which makes them vulnerable. I mean, I've talked to FBI and other experts who say Chinese diplomats and intelligence agents are walking up to Chinese Americans who have relatives in China and saying to them, "Oh, it's very nice to meet you. We see you work in General Electric's carbon fiber division, building jet engines. Let's have a warm, cooperative relationship. Why don't you come to China and talk to us about this?" Well, the obvious implication is that if the government is saying that to you, your family, you can cooperate with the government and make money for yourself and for your family. Or if you don't cooperate, then your family is going to suffer. So I don't know what the percentages are, but and we certainly want to avoid a mass racial hysteria. I mean, this is one of the things that so many people are concerned about in the Chinese American community, and I share that. But we need to find a way to manage the situation. This is something that we've never faced before. The Soviets never had 4 million people, Soviets living inside the United States, insinuated into our top institutions. So it is a brand new phenomenon. I think we can manage it with goodwill and with intelligence, but that's one of the toughest challenges we face.
We still got time for a few more questions, but I wanted to segue to some of the top headlines in recent days that are relevant to your book. I mean, there's so much book that's kind of ripped from the headlines was before the Senate passed the China industrial policy bill, which I think you referred to earlier. But what are some of the things that's happened in recent days that you think people should be paying more attention to?
Well, Xi Jinping's statement, his speech delivered at the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party was astonishing. A lot of China people, China watchers like Bill Bishop, are just reeling in disbelief at that on this moment of the 100th anniversary, the supreme leader of China would stand up and say that anyone who bullies China, and we infer that he means not just bullies them, but resists them.
Yes.
Anyone who opposes their exercise of what they believe to be their rights will have their heads smashed on the steel wall created by 1.4 billion Chinese people. Heads smashing on steel walls. What an incredible kind of image to be eliciting on a moment of such profound significance for China, and one that the whole world was watching. The whole world was watching this spectacle. So he has injected an element of national, just raw nationalism into the debate that is astonishing. It's very surprising. So I think a lot of people are still trying to digest that. What does that really mean? And the official Chinese media tried to mitigate that. They tried to translate that in a much milder version. But so that's what translators do in China. They try to ease the pain. So to me, that's one of the major things. The cracking down on Alibaba, on Didi, in just the last 48 hours or so. I mean, there you can feel a seismic shift going on in terms of the emphasis on Xi Jinping thought. The fact that he appeared in a Mao jacket was on top of Mao in Tiananmen Square was filled with significance. He is taking on the air of the emperor. He is taking on the air, which he is. He has become an emperor.
Sure.
A digital emperor. And so clearly not. I saw one question earlier. Is he going to be stepped down? No, there's no chance that he's going to step down at the end of his second term. He is in this for the long term, as long as he lives, I would suggest. So all the symbolism, all the tonality suggests that we're headed into a much more confrontational mode than I would have guessed a year or two ago.
You were pretty hawkish a year or two ago.
Well, a year or two ago, I wrote The New Art of War, and I thought at the time that I was at risk of being overly confrontational, overly hawkish. But events of the past 2 years have demonstrated that I was on target, at least largely on target. I don't enjoy saying this. This pains me to say this because it turns on the head so many years of my career. I mean, it reveals that I didn't really know what I was talking about for a long time. I was naive, but I think that it's one of my sacred duties as a citizen, as a journalist, to say that all the evidence now suggests that almost all mainstream China watchers were wrong, and that we are now dealing with a pattern that is reminiscent of the building of the Japanese Empire, the German Empire. We're now witnessing the incremental creation of a superpower.
Sobering, and certainly rooted in decades of insight. I want to get final question to you is about the media. You talk a lot about sort of the rapacious short-termism, which has led to the gutting of media and the impact of technology. But you do have a little bit about some of the models that offer some hope. You talk about, I think, the Salt Lake Tribune,
Right.
the Huntsman family. I wonder, just to give folks some hope, what are some of the models that you think are interesting and worth further exploration?
Well, I like that model because journalists were involved in creating a nonprofit, a 401k, 401k. No, that's wrong.
No.
501c3, that's
501c3.
right. I got my acronyms mixed up, I'm sorry.
There are too many of them. It's fine.
So they had social cohesion in Utah. I mean, they're Mormons, and they recognize the need of the community. So that I thought that was very positive. We see certain signs of the Pulitzer Center, for example, has become a very forceful and responsible presence. I like what Charlie Sennett is doing. Charlie Sennett has created Report for America and Report for the World. So he's taking foundation funding and taking some of our winners from the OPC Foundation and putting them in bureaus, put them in the headquarters of newspapers in Traverse City. One of my winners this past year is now working in Traverse City, Michigan, right? So local newspapers and he's working with the AP, John Daniszewski. So to put young people in the bureaus of the AP pays half their salaries. A Report for America pays the other half. So they're in the stages of trying to rebuild the media from the ground up, and by revitalizing these institutions, the Charleston newspaper, Charleston, West Virginia, Lexington, Kentucky. So there are certain models that I think are promising, and we should be examining what are the models that are working and celebrate them and try to replicate them.
Well, as Lincoln once said, the dogmas of the quiet past are unequal to the stormy present. Bill, I want to thank you for your great book, A Grand Strategy. I want to encourage everyone to buy it. Patricia, do you want to take us out with some final words of wisdom?
Yes, I have to say, one of the Charlie Sennett's people is here in my local newspaper in Riverdale in New York, covering local politics and investment. And so that was very gratifying to me to see it was even in my own little local newspaper. But I have to thank both Bill and John for a very thoughtful conversation, and Bill's expertise on China from his lifelong dedication to it shows through. And John, your comments and your skills have made it a very fascinating conversation. So I thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.